Hello, everybody. I am Bradley Vinson, Alanna's pawpaw, as most of you all know me, and I am today's Ecamm Spotlight person. So I'm very excited about being here, and I want to thank everyone that's joining me now. I thank Ecamm for this opportunity. And in short, I'm Bradley Vinson. I'm an advocate for the grieving, a minister, a chaplain, a speaker, and trainer that helps the grieving community and those that care for them. And I know that Ecamm has made me a spotlight for today, and most of the Ecamm family does not know me for the things I'll be talking about today. And this is where my heart is. This is what I was made to do. And I don't know, a lot of the Ecamm family knows me by a what I consider a learned skill. But today you're gonna know me by a skill that I have because of my life. I also want to mention that today, if you're on YouTube, all the super chats that you do will be donated to Julia's Kids. Julia's Kids is an organization for grieving children. They care for grieving children, and they have grief groups where they go in and they work with grieving children to help them, give them hope, and work through their grief. Because a lot of times children are the forgotten grievers among us. We think that children are very resilient, and sometimes we forget about them because they seem to have bounced back very quickly when a grief event happens. So we don't want to forget about the children. And Julia's Kids is a great organization that their focus helping grieving children. So if you make a super chat today, if you're on YouTube, all your super chats will go as a donation to Julia's Kids. If you're not on YouTube and you're on any of the other apparatus right now, you're on my personal Facebook page, you're on my YouTube channel that's not super chat ready yet, or you on any of the places that this is being shared to, you can also just visit Julia's Kids website, juliaskids.org, and make your donation there. So I want you to support them and support the multiple of other organizations that are out there helping our grieving children. So back to me. I am Bradley Vinson, as I said, and I am an advocate for the grieving. And the one thing that I do know is that grief is a universal truth. So what I want to do with the time that I have been given today is just talk through what I do with the grieving community, and hopefully even give you some tools and things that you can use, whether you're on the grief journey or care for someone that may be grieving. So I'm a teacher by nature. That's what I want to do. And I want this to be a discussion. I would love it to be interactive. So if you're out there, let me know you're there. Say something to me. I see some comments coming in now from different people. How you doing, Kay? I think some other people might have scrolled off. But I thank you for being here. And please comment, share. Let's have a conversation about this. And I'll tell you more about who I am later. But let's just kind of get into what I do. And because I am a teacher and trainer by nature, that's just how I serve, how I love to serve. I want to just give you some tools to help you. Thank you, Robert, for that super chat. Thank you, man. How you doing, Miss Felicia? And I'll be doing that during this live too because I want it to be interactive. I just don't want it to be like a talking head presentation, blah, 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 and on. I just want to have an interaction with you all. And I'll be here as long as the conversation is flowing and I think or you tell me that I'm giving you some good content. But grief is one of those things that are universal, but as a group, we don't talk about grief, I think, like we should. And I just want to take some time today to talk about grief and how it's portrayed and how we can find hope in the process of healing. Now, I will give this caveat, and I don't want to alienate anybody, but I'm a believer. I'm a Christian, and some of that stuff might come out in my talk, but I don't want to alienate anyone because I serve everyone that's grieving or wants to help someone else that's grieving. So don't feel alienated if you hear a little Bible speak, so to speak in here. But yes, grief is a universal truth, and we all experience grief at some point in our lives. I really believe that. But what's been kind of what I've noticed lately is that grief is kind of becoming part of the universal discussion because of coronavirus and other things that we're dealing with in our life. And now grief is openly discussed. And I love that because it's a part of our lives and a part of our journey that a lot of us tend to ignore. So let's kind of get into that. And a lot of people talk about grief. And initially, when I first started serving the grieving community in 2016, we talked about grief as it related to loss by death, right? So when you say, oh, I'm grieving the loss of my great, 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 grandma, I'm grieving the loss of this person, this friend, or that friend. And that's kind of the accepted grief that most people will kind of lean into. But I want to talk about some other kind of griefs just right off the bat. And I think what we're dealing with right now during this, isolation of the coronavirus and things like that, people have loss of relationship. There's obviously the loss by death, as I said, loss of resources, loss of finances, loss of health. And so it's all these different things that people are struggling with the loss of. And one of the great things we're struggling with the loss of, if I can be honest, is the loss of control, or the loss of the sense of control. Because once this pandemic happened and we were made to huddle in and isolate in the house and things like that, it was a sense of angst that someone was telling us the things we couldn't do. And so people are grieving that sense of loss of control. They don't have control of their lives anymore. Somebody's telling them where they can go eat and they can't go eat, where they can go worship and can't go worship, if they can even go back to work, or go out and hang out with friends, or go to the beaches. And so there's this kind of overriding just angst and grief over the nation, and beyond. So how do we cope with those things? How do we cope with grief during the pandemic? How are some things that are going on during this pandemic that we didn't even notice was grief, right? And I had a little subtitle that I called it, Grief, How Do We Do It Now? And then the subtopic was, I never thought about it as grief. And right now, I can say that I think a lot of people are grieving during this pandemic, and they don't realize they never would have called it grief. And so I'm going to march through a couple of things that I hope will help you in the midst of this pandemic or whatever else you're dealing with that you could be grieving from. I met a gentleman recently I met a couple of gentlemen. One gentleman that I am helping right now in my chaplaincy role, his wife passed away after 60 years of marriage. Devastating. And he's grieving. And a lot of us can not relate, maybe, but even kind of empathize with that grief. But then there was another gentleman in his 50s that had just went through a divorce. And he's grieving heavily the loss of relationship. Now, his ex-wife is still here, but that loss of relationship is a great grief. And now there are people sitting at home right now, maybe watching this, maybe not, maybe watching the replay, that are sitting at home and just toiling, right? They don't know what to do. They're getting tired of looking at the walls all day long, and they're depressed and they're grieving. All these things are grief. So let's talk about a couple of the things. One of them is isolation in grief. Now, typically when people have had grief events in their life, this is pre-pandemic grief, I'll call it. They feel isolated because they feel nobody understands them in their grief. They feel like they're all alone. They feel like kind of a little bit of woe is me. They cocoon a little bit and just kind of get away from people. But now the pandemic has made us go into isolation, and people are, without that grief knowledge, are trying to figure out how to handle isolation. So let me just talk about that for a quick second. As we deal with isolation in the pandemic, we have to find new ways to connect socially beyond social media because we're in a forced isolation. And I'll give this as an example. There are people in our lives that we were just used to seeing, right? So before the pandemic, we probably rarely called any of our friends, any of our coworkers, and maybe even rarely called family members because we would randomly see them anyway, right? We'd see them at work every day. We'd see our friends at church. We'd see the random stranger we could say hi to at the car wash or at the grocery store. And so we just didn't really call people and reach out to people because we had all these interactions. So now that we're isolating, we have to make an effort to connect to people because when we didn't call people for months at a time before the pandemic, if we don't do that now, there is no connection because we're not seeing them. So we have to make that effort during the midst of this to reach out, call people, have touch points, and things like that. Now, I am an introvert by nature. I might not look like that. I might not talk like that, but speaking and teaching energizes me and makes me kind of extrovert feeling, but I'm an introvert by nature. I never really called people or emailed people outside of business type things before the pandemic. And now that the pandemic is here, I still don't do it as much as I should, right? And I've had people reach out to me to ask me how I'm doing and things like that. And I was like, oh yeah, I haven't seen you in 2 months. Oh yeah, I haven't talked to you in 2 months because the isolation is universal. And if we don't make an effort to reach out in the midst of the isolation, we'll start to lose those connections and our isolation will be a heavier burden. So we have to really watch out for that in the midst of this pandemic. Another thing that's going on right now, unfortunately, is that grief by death is still touching families in the midst of the pandemic. And some of the loss by death is due to the pandemic, by people that have had coronavirus and have passed away. My family has been touched by the coronavirus, and we've lost family members in the midst of the pandemic and because of complications from the pandemic. And grieving remotely has been hard. And I spoke about this topic back in April when at that point my family was kind of not dealing with losses. There wasn't any losses. People had been ill and friends had been ill. But then after I did that video, the first death in my family happened during the pandemic. And being able to grieve and funeralize and care for one another remotely and by distance has been hard. But here's what I want to give you as some tools to even help you with that. There's things we cannot control, right? And when there's a loss during the pandemic and there's a family member that has passed away and we can't get to the funeral because we can't fly, or there can only be so many people at the funeral, they're doing gravesite funerals and things like that, and we can't make it, and the family unit is small, we have to make an effort not to carry the burden of trying to worry about things that we could not control, right? This is something that none of us can control that way. We can't control life and death, and we can't control when it happens. And it just has happened to happen during a pandemic. So here are some suggestions that I think that people can do. One of them, in our technology age, a lot of people are using Zoom. There have been some Zoom funerals and things like that that have been successful just for the family to be able to gather and see each other's face and speak to one another and comfort one another, even if it's remote. If that's not a possibility, there is no reason that the family can't get back together after the pandemic has subsided and get back together and have a memorial service and a family gathering with friends and family and other loved ones and lean on each other in that moment when you can be physically there and physically touch and share memories of the loved one that has passed away through video and pictures and stories. Just do a postponed version of it. There's no reason why you can't do that. Things are just different now. And even our grief has to be, our grief journey has changed from what used to be typical. So in the midst of this, there's still ways to grieve and to support one another. So that's something else you can do. I want to also, as we are dealing with grief, if you're grieving, let me give you a couple of tools that I think will really help you if you're grieving right now. And these tools will actually work beyond the pandemic and things like that. But one of the things that I think a lot of people that are grieving struggle with is the idea that people have stopped understanding them in their grief, or can't relate to them, or they don't know how to express their grief in front of people because they may feel embarrassed about it, or be made to feel like they're doing too much, or being too emotional and things like that about their grief. So here's one thing I want to tell you that will help you, and I think that will relieve a lot of the angst over you in your grief. It's a very simple rule that I came up with, and I call it the 100-0 rule. The 100-0 rule. And all that is simply this. You are 100% in control of making people aware of your grief and that you're grieving. You are 0% in control of how they respond to your grief. We as grievers have to relieve ourselves of the burden of worrying about how other people will feel about our grief. Now, that's not to say that if we mistreat people in our grief because we're hurting and hurt people and those kind of things happen. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you expressing your grief, saying how you feel, being emotional, and doing things as it relates to your grief that way. You are 100% in control of making people aware that you're grieving. You are 0% in control of how they respond to your grief. And I'll give you a personal example of that. Not long after my granddaughter passed away, I was at our church, and one of the pastors approached me and they said, "Brother Vinson, I have something I want to show you. It gives me strength and it helps me when I'm feeling down, and I just want you to see it." And I was like, "Oh, wow, okay, they're going to give me some scripture or a quote. They're going to show me a picture or a poem or something like that." And I followed them back to their seat, and they open up their Bible. And in their Bible is the program for my granddaughter's funeral. And I start crying. Immediately, they closed their Bible. They said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I didn't want to make you feel bad." And I stopped them in their tracks. And I said, "Whenever you want to speak about my dear Alanna, I want to talk about her. But you need to be okay about how I respond to you talking about her. You need to be okay with my tears, because I'm okay with my tears." That is the 100-0 rule in action. I am responsible, you are responsible for telling others that you're grieving. You are 0% in control of how they respond. So that's a key that I want you to hold on to, a tool that I want you to hold on to in your grief. Now, put a little caveat on that, as I said earlier. That does not go with you treating people in a hurtful way because you're hurting, right? Hurt people. And sometimes we can say mean things or do things that are out of our normal behavior because we're grieving. That is not an excuse for that. We don't have an excuse to treat others bad because we're hurting. And our grief is our own, and we also can't expect everyone to understand our grief. I call that grieving with grace, because I have people, when I speak to them about their grief, we have to remember who we were before our grief event, right? We were that person that said, "Hey, everything's going to be okay. Why are you crying so much? it'll be all right in a couple of months, you'll get over it. We were that person. And then we had our grief event, and we had a better understanding of what it's like on this side. So we have to remember that when other people are not responding to our grief as we would expect them to. And I see someone here said, I have streamed 3 funerals during this time. People appreciated the chance to connect, and the immediate family took comfort in knowing that many people could join them from a distance. Yes, that is very true. It's just we have to figure out ways to have touch points even in the midst of this, because grief is going to happen. Life goes on. How do we do that with the tools that we have available to us, right? And so reach out to people, connect socially, like through the phone. Social media is not necessarily the best social interaction tool. We got to find other ways to do it. So definitely. So think about that 100-0 rule, the 100-0 rule. And I really want people to just kind of think about what they're dealing with in their grief and have grace in their grief and work through as you go through the process of grieving, right? Everyone has their own journey. Everyone's journey is individual in their grief, but it's okay for someone to walk alongside of you and to help you for whatever portion they can. You'll notice here that I have 2 websites under my big noggin, and what those 2 websites are about. The first website you see, bradleyvinson.com, is about me speaking and training and ministering to the grieving community. The other website is called goodgriefbook.com, and that's actually my website for my podcast. And it's a podcast where I allow other people's grief to be witnessed, because this is what I've learned. One of the things I've learned on my grief journey and by helping other people with their grief. Grief wants to be witnessed. It wants to be witnessed. And that's part of the healing process, to be able to tell your grief story and tell about your healing journey and tell about your hope journey. So that's a website that I've put together in a podcast where I just basically, I ask everyone the same 3 questions and I let them talk about their grief journey. And it has been a very healing thing. I've learned a lot from it. Other people have been blessed by it. And so if you feel like you are willing to talk about your grief and healing journey, whatever that grief may be, because initially I was only, like I said, talking to people about grief by death. But one of my dear friends called me and they were like, I have a hope and healing journey that I have been on since I've battled cancer. And her story is so important to everyone, to the global community. And so I don't want to niche so far down while I'm only talking to people that have had loss by death. Yes, that is probably the major portion of the stories that are being told. But if you have a story about loss of health, you've dealt with health issues, and now you're on that journey of hope and healing, I want to hear it. Other people want to hear it to help them, give them guideposts along the way. I really think that what's going on is that so many of us on the grief journey are not allowing our grief to be witnessed. And once you're on the journey, there are people that are in front of us on the journey that have been on it longer than us that can set guideposts for us as we walk the journey. But now that I'm on the journey and others are on the journey, we can set guideposts for those coming behind us. Because unfortunately, everyone that is walking this earth right now will grieve somebody or something. And at some point, someone will grieve us. That is just part of the journey of life. And so why can't we walk alongside of other people as they approach this journey, as they're on it for themselves, or help give them tools to walk with other people, right? And hopefully those tools have helped you in some way. I'm going to look here at the chat a little bit too. And I want to see if other people are saying things. Yes, grief needs to be witnessed for sure. Yes, thank you for helping that ministry called Angelica's Ministry. Thank you for that. Yes. Loss of an infant, grieving family. Yes. Yes. Um, yes. I won't say I understand you, Miss Felicia, but that is happening a lot when people are passing away in isolation. But I want to encourage you that, and encourage your friend, please encourage them that there are just some things out of our control. And life is one of those things. When we have the extra covering right now, the pandemic and other things, and so people are actually passing away in their isolation, and people are dying alone. And it can be so hard. But we have to lean into each other's grief and comfort them where we can. A lot of times when we are leaning into other people's grief, we have to give their grief space to breathe, right? The ministry, I call it, and like I said, I'm a chaplain and I'm a minister. The ministry of presence goes a long way. Just being able to sit with someone in silence or call someone and say, I am just here to listen. And just listen. They don't need you to wax poetic. They don't need you to give them a great word. Sometimes your silence is the best word you can give someone. And as our hearts break, leaning into someone else's grief and letting them know, I am here to walk whatever part of the journey you will allow me to, goes a long way. And I can not relate directly to what your friend is going through, but we had a family member that died when they were alone in their home, and we couldn't make it to the funeral. And we are still grieving the idea of not being able to be with family in that critical moment. But as soon as this thing is over, as soon as this pandemic stuff is over and we can freely travel, guess where we're going? We're going to get around our family and love and hug on them. And yes, some of it might be triggering just to see us because it's months since our family member passed away. But that's also part of the healing process. Sometimes we got to knock that scab off, and sometimes the wound gets raw again when we have our triggering moments. But that's also part of the healing process. And this is what I call that a little bit. Right now, I think a lot of what's going on and a lot of our grief right now, we're grieving, we're wounded, and then we put a big band-aid on it, right? And immediately in our grief and we have hurts and cuts and pains in relation, like when I'm talking about that as an example, we cover the wound to protect it, right? So if we bump a table or our clothes rub up against it, that wound will be protected. But at some point, you have to take that band-aid off and let that wound get crusty and heal and make a scab and maybe make a scar. It has to be breathed on. Air has to get on it, right? And I call that letting God breathe on it. Let God breathe on our wounds. And sometimes they'll get crusty and scab over, right? But we are all an accumulation of our scars. And that's just part of the process. We will get through this like we've gotten through everything else. Up until this point in all of our lives, whether you are grieving or not, up until this point right now today that you're watching this video, we have made it through 100% of the things that have happened to us. All of us have. As of this day, all of us watching this video has made it through 100% of the things that have happened to us. Right? So we will get through this too. And as we move through it as best we can, and we're on the other side, we can circle back and be amongst those that we care about and grieve with them and love on them and hug on them and spend time, right? So we have to do that. Now, as I kind of talked about tools for us a little bit, I talked about some things where you can sit with, well, a couple of things where you can sit with friends and love on them and be present with them. Exactly. My wife said something perfect just then. made it through but not unscathed, right? Because we are an accumulation of our scars. We're an accumulation of all the things that are part of our life. And I truly believe when we talk to others and they see us and we're talking, our scars are revealed. They're part of our life story. And I always say we're always in the process of healing, ing. We're never, I believe, on this side of eternity, completely healed, ed. We're always in the process of healing, right? And happiness and joy and more healing and more knowledge and more faith and more of the things we need are just further down that journey if we just keep walking. So always in the process of healing, and always look at it like that. You may never be healed on this side, but you can always be healing and always be leaning into your grief and leaning towards hope and looking for things that can help you. So hopefully those tools have helped you. And I will be remiss if I didn't take at least a couple of minutes to talk about a couple of tools that I've come up with to help us work with grieving children. As I said, Julius Hope, I'm sorry, not Julius Hope, Julius Kids is an organization that's being supported today by your super chats. Those of you that are on YouTube with me right now through the Ecamm network. I personally don't have a super chat on my channel. So if you're looking at this on my channel or through my Facebook page or through places that have been shared, please visit juliuskids.org and make your donation directly through their website. I am so thankful right now that Ecamm has stepped up and said, hey, all of our super chats will be donated directly to Julius Kids, which is an organization that works with grieving children. I saw in the list, and unfortunately I can't scroll back through the chat. I've been trying to keep up with it, but I saw at least 2 or 3 super chats that came through of around $20 or so, and everything helps. And I am so thankful. I know that juliuskids.org will be thankful. There's another $20. Wow. Cool. Thank you so much. In honor of Mr. Anthony Robinson and his 6-year-old daughter. Yep. Wow. Through a tragedy that happened with that family. Thank you, Rap and Combat, for that. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone else that's willing to do the super chat or go directly to Julius Kids and make those donations. But what I want to do here, in honor of Julius Kids and other organizations that help grieving children, another organization that's really close to my heart, I'm on their board. It's called Camp Agape, and they work with grieving children and now their families on dealing with grief by loss. Wow, Real Truth and Power. Thank you all for your super chat donation. Thank y'all so much. This is making me super happy. I'm gonna leave up to Julius Kids so you can be reminded about that while I'm talking before I go into the next thing. But I want to give you all, I'm a big acronym guy to help people remember stuff. And I want to give you all an acronym that I use when it comes to helping grieving children. Because like I said, I believe that grieving children can be the forgotten grievers among us because they seem so resilient and they seem to snap back so quickly. And sometimes we think that the kids might not even be grieving, but they are, and they're hurting. And I want to give you some tools as the adult or the caring adult, parent, grandparent, guardian, older sibling in a child's life that I believe can help them as they're on this grief journey. And I call the acronym HELP, HELP, right? H, you need to have the hard, honest, but age-appropriate conversations with your children or the child in your life about what happened. Children are afraid that their heroes, which are us, have been broken in some way or less confident when grief has struck. We got to help them understand that bad things happen, but to not be afraid, right? And I call that catastrophizing. And I think I made that word up. It might be in a dictionary, who knows. But it's like, it's essentially always waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? And when grief happens in a child's life, they tend to think, oh, that's about to happen to everybody else I love. And my grandchildren are still dealing with that now after the loss of their sister and cousin. And they're always waiting for that next shoe to drop. So having the hard but honest conversation with your children, age appropriate, about what has happened will help them, right? And help them get through what they're dealing with. E, you have to express yourself. You have to model healthy grieving in front of the children. And though you are grieving, they're going to take their cues from us, right? And we got to keep mindful of that first H in the acronym. But be mindful and be age appropriate about how you do it. You have to express your grief. When my grandchildren would approach me early on, and even sometimes now, they'll say, hey, Pawpaw, are you thinking about Alanna? Are you sad? And I'll say, yes, I'm sad. I'm thinking about her. And yes, I cried yesterday about her. And I've even cried in front of them. You have to show the full spectrum of emotion. I'm not talking about the boo-hoo, slobbing at the mouth, falling out kind of crying that's going to scare them. You have to do that in your private time somewhere else. But showing the full spectrum of emotion in front of the children in your life will show them that those are all real emotions that they can work through, right? Especially our young boys. We have to have the full spectrum of all emotion in front of them. We have to model that. L, lean in and love more. We got to show more affection. We got to give more caring touch. We got to give more hugs. We got to be more present. Just like that H, right? The children look at us, their heroes, and they see that there's a chink in our armor, or our cape might have some wrinkles in it, right? Or have some tears in it. But we have to lean in and love on them more. Spend more cuddle time. Spend more just time doing nothing, playing cards, playing games. Not in the realm of the grief stuff, but just spending time. That time and presence means a lot to children, right? And just have different conversations and do different things with the children, right? Now, I have an extra L for this. And this is one that my grandson, our oldest grandson, made me think of. And this L is let them lead sometimes. And I thought of this L because one day my wife and I were just kind of sitting around the house, and our grandson walked up and said, I want to look at some of my sister's things, right? Because we have a storage bin with some of her things in it that we kept with her clothes and things like that. And he walked in, he said, I want to look at some of my sister's things. So I look at my wife, she looks at me, and we were like, okay. So we get the tissue out, get some blankets, and we just sat on the floor, opened up the box, and we told stories, we cried, and we just thought about it, right? And sometimes we have to let the children lead when it comes to memorializing and thinking about our loved one that has passed away. And here's another caveat that I want to kind of a sidestep a little bit. Part of letting the children in our lives lead a little bit during how we do grief is asking them how they feel about certain other things that we do related to grief. And I'll give this point. My grandson, just one day, because we have open conversation, he said, I don't like going to the gravesite all the time. And we were like, okay. He was like, but I'm a kid and I can't stay at home by myself. I can't do other stuff. So whenever you guys say we're going to the cemetery, I have to go. But I don't always want to go. And so having that conversation helped us kind of figure out, well, how much do we go? Sometimes he's going to go just because we say we're going. But sometimes it's like, do we really have to go this time? Even though I feel like it, maybe it might be too much for him. And so these are just ways that we can let our children lead in the memorialization process and remembrance process of those we love. Then finally, P, have patience. We have to be willing to tolerate, and tolerate's a hard word. We have to be willing to empathize. That's a better word. We have to be willing to empathize where our children are in their grief journey. And their grief will change as they age and develop. So 4-year-old grief is different than 6-year-old grief. It's different than 13-year-old grief. It's different than 18-year-old grief, right? And looking at it from an adult's point of view, okay, I'm a grown man. Someone died. I'm dealing with it with an adult sensibility. But a child, as they develop, they're going to keep re-grieving at wherever they are in their development. And we have to be willing to be patient with them and circle back to wherever they are in their grief. It is so important, because helping a 4-year-old grieve, when that 4-year-old becomes 6, they're going to re-grieve that trauma or that grief event as a 6-year-old. And we have to be willing to circle back, no matter how far we think we are on our journey. We have to be willing to circle back and be with them in that grief moment. So that's the acronym. And thank you, my wife Bonita, for jumping in and putting the acronym for me. HELP. H, have the honest, hard conversations, age appropriate. E, express yourself. Show how you can grieve in a healthy way. L, lean in, love more, and let them lead sometimes. And P, have patience. So that's some tools that I really think can help you work with children that are in your life, or those little hurting hearts, as I call them, to help you help them on their grief journey. So I didn't say a lot about me and about what brought me here, and what has helped me, what has put me in a position I'm in now to serve the grieving community. So what I would love to do is just kind of wrap up this talk with a little story, or a little lesson that I call it. And the name of it is What My Grandchildren Taught Me About Grief. And it's essentially my story, and about a little bit about me, a little bit deeper impact about me, and what has brought me here to serve you and serve the grieving community. So I'll end with this, and hopefully this will bless you and help you. And essentially, I'll never forget that day back in 2016. I was at work and everything was just kind of getting ramped up and things were happening, and then the phone rang, and I was told that my 4-year-old granddaughter had passed away in an accident. That day enrolled my family and I into the School of Grief, after that tragic, sudden loss of her. And that journey that I've been on has placed me in hospitals and homes, helping people that as they're grieving different losses of many kinds. It's put me in meetings with different groups trying to learn how to care for themselves and care for grieving students and co-workers. And it has placed me on stages, in pulpits, and behind podiums, all different kind of places, online, being interviewed, to kind of share my story of where my hope and healing began. But grief has taught me a lot of things over these last 4 years. But grief does not work alone. And I've had many teachers along the way. And I'm going to tell you about 3 of the most special teachers I've had. And it's 3 of my grandchildren: Bryce, TJ, and Alanna. And they have taught me things that have brought me closer to my purpose, to my healing, and even my relationship with God. And so after my wife and I received those devastating calls about my granddaughter, we had to go from Texas to Louisiana to go see about them. And we had to go to the school and to their daycare center, which was actually where the accident was that unfortunately took my granddaughter's life. And I was given a task almost immediately as we got there in the building. We were sitting with the principal and some of the other teachers. And the principal looks at me and tells me, he said, Bryce doesn't know what happened to his little sister, and I feel it's only right that you tell him. Now, at that time, I was just Brad, right? I wasn't a chaplain. Yes, I was in seminary, and I had no no knowledge of how that I even wanted to care for the grieving community, nothing like that. I was a grieving grandfather in that moment. And I'm asked by the principal to go break the news to my then 6-year-old grandson that his sister had passed away. And I walked down the hall. They put us in this little room. And I remember sitting him on my lap. And I held his hand and I told him the worst news that he's ever heard, that his little sister wasn't coming home. Here's what's amazing. My grandson, Bryce, looks me in the eye and says, "Thank you, Pawpaw, for telling me," and wraps his arms around my neck. And that day he became my first teacher through this lesson that he taught me that kind of only became clear after some later reflection. We're all called to serve and comfort others, even in our brokenness. Now, he's 10 years old now. That's a picture of him over here next to me. And his little servant heart has been serving people over and over. He's been teaching his classmates how to pray for their sick parents and friends. He evangelizes the children in the neighborhood, inviting them to church. He's actually even speaking and ministering to other little hurting hearts at events that are facing life without their loved ones. He is eager to step in and comfort. And he's also published a book, which he's holding right there in his hands, called What This Kid Wants Adults to Know About Grief. And it's a special book that he wrote to help adults care and better understand the little hurting hearts in their lives. And that's his website there, thiskidsgrief.com. It's a very special book from his heart, and it is already helping organizations and parents and groups all over the place. The amazing thing about this, he is doing all these things with a heart fractured by grief. Now, not long after our granddaughter passed away, my wife and I have been blessed with the opportunity to help raise Bryce and TJ. We call it reparenting, right? It's just another chance for us to get it right. And I want to dispel one myth, huge myth right now. Kids do not keep you young, they keep you tired. It's craziness, right? But in this blessing of being in this reparenting mode, it's a lot of running around and doing things. And part of those things is actually learning how to run behind a toddler. TJ came to us not long after he was 2 years old. And this is TJ. He's now 6. And I remember one day, running behind TJ and doing different stuff with TJ. This dude was in full toddler mode, right? And the weather was bad and there was a big storm brewing out in the distance. And, he's being rambunctious and all this kind of stuff. And I'm doing my best to put him in his car seat. And I'm just trying to strap him in. Then TJ looks up at me from his car seat and he says, "It's sunny." And I'm already a little bit frustrated. And I say, "No, TJ, it's cloudy." Then he says, "It's sunny." And I say, "No, TJ, it's overcast. It's cloudy." Then TJ points up over my shoulder, takes a deep breath, and he said, "Pawpaw, the sun is there." And I look over my shoulder up into the dark sky, and there is no sun. Now, I finished strapping him into his car seat, and then emotion just overtook me. And what I haven't told you is that morning I was just having a bad morning. I was kind of just in the throes of grief, thinking about my granddaughter. And I was already kind of not feeling fully there. And what TJ said hit me like a ton of bricks. I finished strapping him in his car seat, and as I go to get in my car seat, I lose it. And I'm just, tears are pouring. And I realized that this little toddler had hit me with a parable. The sun, S-U-N, did not disappear just because the clouds had blocked it from my view. The sun, S-O-N, also hadn't left me, just because the darkness of my tears and grief made it hard for me to see or feel him. My little toddler grandson taught me that God is always speaking and showing us his presence. He also taught me that God's still small voice sometimes sounds like a toddler, especially when that toddler says, "Pawpaw, God gives us new mercies. Pawpaw, Jesus is our friend. Pawpaw, are you happy? You should be happy." These are the words of my then toddler grandson. Amazing. And finally, let's go back a little bit. I'm going to go back to a time when the events that brought me here, doing all this stuff, and even this video for you today, were beyond my wildest dreams or even my worst nightmares. My granddaughter, pictured here, Alanna, she was born September 1st, 2011. She was 2 months early. And I look back on that time with her back then as extra time that we got. She wasn't too much bigger than a 2-liter Coke bottle, maybe not even that big. But she was strong. And not long after, she was able to start walking and talking, she started impacting lives with the simplest of statements and gestures. Her favorite one was probably, "Do you need a hug?" And right before she left us to move on to heaven, she had discovered the joy of pickles and wanted to make sure that everybody had the experience of this great new food she discovered. So with a big, bright smile, she would walk up to strangers and say, "Do you like pickles?" and just break out laughing. It was crazy to see people in grocery stores or department stores or at the gas station or at church or wherever else reduce to tears just talking to her or seeing her hug on strangers, and they just lose it. She was ministering to these people at that young age. In just a heartbeat, their lives were changed by being in her presence. Now, in April 2016, Bryce, TJ, and Alanna were visiting us, and Alanna noticed a vase that had some candy in it on our mantle. And it was a gift from a family friend that had an angel baby. Their baby had passed away, and my wife and I were kind of caring for the family. More so, my wife was caring for the mom. And Alanna asked her, BB, that's my wife, "Hey, what's that?" And my wife told her that it was a gift from a mommy that had an angel baby that she's a friend of and she cares for. And Alanna said, "Can I talk to her?" Now, Alanna's 4. And I want you to keep that in mind. Alanna said, "Can I talk to her?" My wife reached out to that mom, and she said she'd do her best to come to church that Sunday, but it'd be difficult. We didn't know at that point that that Sunday was the anniversary date of that lady's baby passing away the summer before. And so we were at church, we were taking Alanna to the nursery, and unbeknownst to us, the lady walks down the hall of the church. And my wife introduced them, and Alanna runs up to her and gives her a hug and starts a conversation with her. And none of us are able to hear it. 1 month after that, Alanna was with the Lord. That mother reached out to us after Alanna's passing, and she wouldn't tell us the content of what Alanna was said to her. But what she told us is that Alanna ministered to her and gave her relief on that part of her grief journey. Alanna taught me it only takes a heartbeat to create a bond and impact someone else's life. She taught me it's always the right time to make a connection. My granddaughter Alanna jam-packed all the ministry she could into 4 years of life. And even after her transition, another little child's heart is beating. And another child's eyes can better see the world because of her gifts. Now I gotta confess to you, I have great grandchildren, right? And it was hard to find a single lesson that each of them have taught me, because each lesson could have been interchanged, and there's different things that all of them have given me in my life. But it's like driving through a fog with one headlight on, right? And all the mist clears, and you just kind of see all these things and all these nuggets they've dropped on my life. My life and my grief are constant reminders of what I don't have, what I won't be able to do, what I will never experience on this side of heaven. But these lessons from 3 of my grandchildren serve as a reminder to what I do have. And it should be a reminder to what all of you have. I have my hands and feet to serve others, even with a broken heart. I have my eyes and ears to be more aware of what God is saying and doing to reveal Himself to me at a deeper level, and to keep my eyes and ears open to the needs of others. Now, if you don't mind, wherever you are out there in cyberspace on the other side of this screen, whatever you're doing, could you place your hands over your heart for me? Do you feel that? That's my last lesson. We all have only so many more heartbeats left to make a difference, to impact lives and leave a legacy of hope and faith. And I'm still learning. But I ask for your prayers as I continue my journey to strive to honor God and my family by being a model student and a teacher, to teach well when I'm given the opportunity. And I'll pray for y'all that you'll be encouraged as you use your hands, feet, eyes, ears, and hearts for the glory of God to bless others. So that's the end of my spotlight time. But I'm so happy they called it a spotlight, because I want to do my best to let my light shine and help people see hope and faith as they move through some of the darkest periods of their life. And I hope that some of the things I have given you today will help you in some of the dark moments you may have in your life, or that you can be a light for others that may be traveling some dark paths. I want to give you hope. I want you to have faith. I want you to lean into the things you need to be doing to prosper and be well. And I'll end with this. I am Bradley Vinson. Almost made it through the whole video. I am Bradley Vinson, Bryce, TJ, and Alanna's student, and Paw. Be blessed, y'all. See y'all next time. Have a blessed day.